All right, it's 12:02. We'll go ahead and get started with today's presentation. My name is Andy Purcell. I work as a business consultant here with TCS. Many of you I may know already, and some others I look forward to meeting. Today, we're going to go through a presentation and then discussion about creating a bulletproof disaster strategy. As I'm sure all of you know, this has become a very critical area recently. And certainly as we've gone through the last 2 or 3 years of upheaval and change in business, it has increased still in importance. Ransomware being a part of that, movements to the cloud being a part of that, people working at home or away from the office being a part of that. So I think it is even more important than it was a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, that we have a good strategy in place for disaster recovery and in case of something unexpected were to occur. As we go through this presentation, please save your questions to the end. There is a Q&A portion at the top, so not the chat, but the Q&A. Select that if you would, and I will go through those questions at the end. I'm sure there will be a few, and we can address those at that point. So with one more sip of water, we'll get started. So creating a bulletproof strategy. As you can imagine, and certainly if you've been to enough TCS events over your time and your acquaintance with us, you've heard us use the phrase of a layered strategy. So that is very true in creating a DR strategy, just as it is in any other security strategy. So what we want to do is talk about the different layers that you can put in place, the different pieces that you can employ to be able to create a strategy for your company that is unique to you, that is effective, and in the long run will ensure that if you do have a natural event or an unnatural event, that we're able to recover quickly, get back up to speed, and minimize the impact to the organization. So as we go through the pieces and the parts of this discussion today, we'll talk about how to calculate the cost of downtime. And as a warning, there is math involved. It is not difficult, but I think you'll see in doing that what the different pieces and components are of realizing what it costs you if you have a disaster or an event that causes you to be down. And that leads us into the second topic. What are those causes? How do I stop them? How to mitigate those dangers? And how do I not only understand them, but prevent them through that understanding? The third portion is going to be the importance of actually having a backup and disaster recovery plan in place. Again, we will use the term BDR today. We'll use the term DR today, and those are backup disaster recovery and disaster recovery. So be prepared and understand that I'm referring to those when you hear those acronyms. And then the last bit will be avoiding those interruptions, avoiding those downtimes, whether they're through disaster or through some sort of nefarious acts, and how to avoid having those interruptions in your network. All right, so first, I did warn you about the math. So we're going to do a little bit of this algebra, a little bit of this calculus, and determine what it's going to cost you if you are down. So if you have a piece of paper, if you just want to follow along mentally, here's the first piece to calculate what it costs your business if you have an interruption. And the first thing is to consider the number of employees that you have. Now, some of those you may be able to send home. Some of those you may be able to get to do other things. Some of those may be engaged in tasks that don't require IT as part of that task. I think particularly in a manufacturing environment, your shop floor may be able to continue even if the IT functions are down. But let's begin by taking a look at the total number of employees. And then we want to look at the average wage. So some of these folks may be hourly, some of them may be salary, some of them may be commissioned workers, but figure out a number that you can understand going forward based upon what you think an average employee wage is for your organization. And then the next piece of our formula here is thinking about what is the average percentage of lost productivity. Okay, so that is office staff completely down, may have to go home, may have to stay around the office and do menial cleanup tasks, cleaning up their files or whatever it is that they're doing, but they're not productive. Then you have some workers who are sitting on a shop floor who, at least for a short period of time, may be able to keep working with that IT input. But it may be that even after the first few hours or into a second day, if you go that far, those employees may not be able to work if they're not receiving inputs from a CRM system, orders from clients, that type of thing. So figure out what percentage of lost productivity you're going to have as a result of downtime. So this may be 10 employees who make an average of $45,000 each, and you lose 75% of productivity. Okay, so as you multiply those three numbers, you're going to get a total cost per hour, right? Number of people, amount of money, and then the percentage you actually lose for workers who can't do their job gives you a total cost per hour of your downtime. It's probably a rather sobering number, but it's the first piece in our puzzle. And then on the other side of things, you want to take a look at how much revenue that you're going to miss per hour when you're down. So the calculation is very similar. What is the revenue of your organization? Doesn't matter if it's 1 million, 10 million, 100 million, whatever. What is that number for your organization for an annual basis? So for 2022, what did the organization show as revenue? And then days that you're open. So if you work 5 days a week in a 40-hour work week, you're open 52 weeks a year. You got some vacation time in there, then you've got some other. So maybe instead of 365 days, you use 250 days for the number of days that you're open conducting a business in a given year. And then how many hours per day? Is it 8 hours? Do you have 2 shifts so that it's 12 to 16, depending on how you stagger your shifts? But take a look at what those numbers are. So this next component of our formula number 2 is gross revenue, number of days per year that you're open, and then number of hours per day. All right, so it's going to come up with what actually is your lost revenue per hour. And as we place those together to arrive at the actual number and figure that we're going to use today, you take the first formula for the amount of money that you're losing in productivity, take the second formula, value H in this case, which is the amount of money that you're losing, or revenue that you're losing rather, by not being able to take orders and conduct business. And that's going to give you the total cost of your downtime. Okay, now the number is probably going to be pretty unbelievable, but if you cut that in half and in half again, you're probably getting to something that still is significant enough that you're going to want to prevent that from occurring. Classic example, if someone works on a billable scenario, could be an attorney, could be a plumber, either one, they're simply able to produce X amount of work product during that time. And if they're not able to work, they're losing the time of the downtime for the person and the downtime for the revenue that they're not bringing in, right? So it's a pretty significant number as we go through it. If you want to look at the downtime causes, so what happens to create this? Where does the trouble originate? And in knowing that, we can take a look at how to help it or how to fix it. Cybersecurity certainly is the one that is sort of first in mind these days. And I want to go over briefly just a few different types of cyber incidents that can occur. But we know the big ones, the ransomwares, the phishing attacks. Let's talk about maybe where those come from. What everybody thinks about it is an external actor, right? So this external actor can be an individual in the old days wearing a hoodie in his grandmother's basement. Those days are kind of over, but your external actors today are much, much more sophisticated, more intelligent. They are sending out phishing emails. They are creating messages that sound like they are you, or they're your CEO, there's someone on your staff. They're asking for you to buy gift cards. They're asking you to pay a bill to a vendor that may really exist for you. Greatest example of that is the CEO had gone on vacation from a company here locally. And while he's on vacation, he receives a message to his office and it asks him to pay a bill for $30,000. Well, the message sounded like him. He was definitely on vacation. He even included a picture of he and his daughters getting ready to go ziplining and saying, I won't be in until after 5 today because we're going ziplining. Please make sure we get this paid. So everything was legitimate on there with the exception of the wiring information, right? So legitimate even that his Facebook that day had a picture of he and his daughters going ziplining. So that's how much more sophisticated these external actors have become. So they could be creating phishing emails. It could be someone looking for open port, sort of in an old school style, or it could be someone who is engaged in ransomware trying to deliver some kind of payload to your network. Organized crime groups. You hear about this, particularly Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe. It's very real. Some of these are state actors even. I know, heard an FBI agent do a presentation for us in the past where it is factual that the Chinese government, North Korean governments in particular, have divisions that are cyber crime divisions of their military, where their job is to go out and create ways to get into not only government, but even to begin destabilizing corporations and some of our infrastructure here. Next is internal actors. And this is maybe even more frightening in the sense that this may be somebody internally who either is taking data and sharing it with others in a traditional espionage, corporate espionage role, or maybe allowing someone in who shouldn't be in the building, maybe accidental. I mean, how many people in your organization have a yellow Post-it note with their password on it? But someone internally is allowing access to your data that leads to an incident with downtime. Partner actors, sort of kind of what it sounds like. Someone comes in from the outside, maybe they're dressed like the phone company, maybe they say they're from the cable company. Someone inside lets them in. Again, this could be, they could be complicit or not. It could just be from not paying enough attention. But it takes two parties in this case to allow somebody into your server room under the guise of checking status, checking servers, the phone up and running. We've had some glitches in your internet. We're checking that out, that kind of thing. Last would be multiple parties. My favorite example of one of these is some sort of bad actor comes through a corporate environment and drops 100 flash drives in the parking lot. All right. That flash drive could say payroll information. It could say wedding pictures, anything that sounds like somebody's going to look at it. Because let's admit it, most folks will want to look at payroll information. They take that in, maybe multiple people take that in, plug that flash drive in, then it propagates some sort of malware across the network. So the biggest case today that we can prevent are these cybersecurity risks. Other risks that may be preventable in some ways, like maintenance and support, are hardware failures. And this is simple. You've got a drive go out on a server. You may have a firewall go down, therefore closing the website and denying access for people outside into the network for a VPN through, for example. So these are some piece of hardware in your organization going down. A switch goes bad, could be another example. So you can maintain a healthy stance or posture by making sure all these devices are current on maintenance, making sure that you do have someone taking a look at them, upgrading firmware, making sure on the latest version, making sure they stay healthy, making sure that your support agreements, if it's a server in particular, but any other device, allows for very quick replacement of parts or even the full device if it goes bad. So hardware failure is one that we can prevent by simply taking those common sense measures, but it can absolutely bring you down and cause downtime for your organization. Software failure. Okay, this could be something as simple as a problem with their website and that no orders are coming in. All right, it may be a CRM application that installs a bad update, or maybe it is malware driven, but it stops the CRM system. This may be machinery in your warehouse or on your plant floor that can't run either because an update didn't arrive or because it messed something else up or custom programming failed. Lots of reasons you can have software failures, but it is just as damaging for most people as if you had a hardware failure. So it's another point within your organization that you need to make sure you're maintaining your maintenance. If you're doing any custom programming, that you be sure before you do an upgrade to the software that you understand that there may be pieces related to that you need to update for your custom programming. So those are an example of how a software failure can be just as damaging as any other. And then natural disasters. Some of you may recognize these pictures. They are from the tornado that came through maybe 10 years ago now One of the hardest hit areas was Stoneville, just north of Greensboro here. But if you've lived through something like that, you know it's a huge example. It's not always a tornado destroying the physical brick and mortar. It may be a flood from a heavy rain or a thunderstorm. It may be the remnants of a hurricane coming through. But I will tell a story on one of our clients, and you know, if you're on, you know who you are, who actually ran back into a building to save servers, right? And their building was in the middle of a disaster and ran back in to pull servers out and carry them out. Our hope and our design with having a DR solution is that you won't have to physically retrieve your hardware, because you know that you can run in the cloud, you can virtualize that and be back up very, very quickly. And probably in these cases you see in the picture here, your IT comes back long before the building is safe to re-enter. So just a heads up that you probably don't want to physically endanger yourself if you've got a good DR strategy. All right, and then you want to take a look at what's going to be affected. Okay, so what sorts of devices, what sorts of your work every day, what sorts of your job can't you do? What is not able to take place because of this disaster? If we look at simple things, communications, if you've got an Exchange server sitting in a closet, you may not be able to email. Certainly if you depend on desk phones, you may not be able to have phone calls. If a server goes down, or if you have a hardware failure, perhaps the website fails. And with all the e-commerce we're doing, or EDI orders that may be generated through your website, that may be a big deal. So are there mitigation strategies? Absolutely. Have at least a plan to move to a cell phone, or move to a VoIP phone that allows you to do a soft phone, or make that your main strategy, where you can use soft phone or use a cell phone in lieu of a desk phone, to make sure that you're not going to have that danger. Email, obviously going to the cloud using something like Microsoft 365, that will eliminate the worry of an in-house Exchange server being a point of failure for you. And that would allow you to retrieve that email anywhere, anytime while you're down. Website, third-party hosting prevents the website itself from going down. Using a third party, perhaps through a bank or through someone who's specific to your industry, for that third party ordering, or the sales orders going through, prevents those from going down. So even if your physical servers go down, you're still going to have that third party hosted site and ordering process to keep you working, and that buys you time to find a way to deliver those orders. Or if you're in a medical environment, for example, schedule, and perhaps you're in an alternate location, but that scheduling system, or in a legal, I guess it would be having that archive or access to those files for you. Next is can we work? There's the physical component. Can we get into our building? Can we sit at a desk? But there's also the data and the application process. If I can't access my data, I'm very limited in what I can do, right? So that goes back to the on-site server. We're probably seeing about 50-50 people keeping on-site server versus moving to the cloud. Nothing wrong with either solution. One of the points of exposure with keeping your data on site, if that server goes down, or if you can't get to it from a natural disaster, or if you're hit by ransomware, you lose access to that data. If you're in the cloud, you can take a laptop or a cell phone to another location and access the data. So just something to keep in mind as you're making that decision. Most of us probably are in a hybrid environment, so having a good backup that you can then virtualize and work from is another way to be able to keep the company going, or the organization going, even if your physical server is damaged. Next is your applications, and the story is kind of the same here. Lots of us today are using cloud-based applications, which is great. Some of us are still using in-house applications. Things that are database intensive may be easier to run in-house, or to run in a hybrid mode, because that database may live in-house and be more functional or more efficient doing it that way. I would say having some kind of a plan to get back up and running, have a quality backup that can be virtualized, is just as important here as it is with your data. And then the last piece of this, if you have a paper system, so blessing and curse, right? If you have a paper system and your physical structure is fine, in the case of, say, ransomware, you can work off of that paper system, whether it is scheduling, whether it is billing, whether it is taking orders and that kind of thing. But that paper system can become a detriment if you're not able to get into your physical location. So some combination of these three is probably best for most companies in most environments. The next, can we deliver? So if you are a service provider, doctor, lawyer, CPA firm, can you deliver your goods and services? Can you meet at another location? Are you preventing people from coming in to doing business with you because you're not able to have a brick and mortar business, because you are not able to get up on your data, your applications, because your server is down? Do you have an alternative that allows you to keep working? Okay, so obviously if you're able to virtualize on a backup solution, that answer is yes. If you're able to get into your building and find a way to get access, or if you have a paper system, that answer is yes. If you have cloud applications or your data in the cloud, that answer is yes. You simply work from a different spot. But think about how that affects others, right? How do your clients see you? Your customers, your patients, whoever you work with, how do they see you if they can't access the website, if they can't reach you via phone? How do your suppliers, can they get you your raw materials if you're in a manufacturing environment? Can they deliver to you what needs to be delivered? Do you have an alternate plan there? Even temporary space is a good example, either for putting your people in and allowing them to work, or any sort of materials or finished goods that you might have. Another way to look at it, are your competitors going to be able to take advantage? Right, so if you don't have access to this data, you're not able to get into your systems. It's an opportunity for your competitors to not only use that from a PR standpoint, but perhaps even to take customers or to denigrate you on social media or in person with those clients or prospects. So take into account not only for you, but can you deliver? Can you continue doing business? How much will this downtime affect you? Now, once we've seen all of the nightmares, right, and gone through the scenarios of what can go wrong, how the flood comes through, the tornado, the ransomware attacks, now we can take a look at what do we do with backups, disaster recovery, to mitigate those fears, and then also can we avoid those interruptions? All right, so the reason here to have a good BDR solution or DR solution really does come down to finances and the health of your company. Okay, a third of companies have a backup solution but never test it. I was at a client site this week. They were still using tapes. I cannot even begin to imagine the condition of those tapes that they're using. They had not done a recent test in memory of how that had done or how that had gone and if it would work. So we suggested to them that they should run, not walk, to some sort of solution that is data-based, whether it's cloud, whether it's an on-site backup with a copy in the cloud, or whether it's simply on-site, but getting away from the tapes. And even then, you're going to have to go ahead and do that test. We would suggest quarterly, because when that is done, 3/4 of those find out their failures. Now, it may not be a total failure. They may be able to get the bulk of the data back. In the case of the tapes, however, it may be a total failure, but they do find failures within those backups in 3/4 of the cases. Another point here is 60% of organizations, okay, that may lose their data for as much as 10 days go out of business. Imagine, could you sustain your current level if you did not do business for 10 days? Again, that is a nightmare, but it's very real. If your backup isn't good and it isn't tested, if you're hit with ransomware or you're hit with a physical sort of disaster, the flood, the hurricane, the lightning, that kind of disaster, hopefully your insurance will kick in. But ask that question, how long can you go before it begins to get uncomfortable? Hopefully you're not one of those 60% that would go out of business, and hopefully you'll never have to face it. The other piece is if it is as simple as a hard drive failure, or if you have to try to recover from a bad drive, okay? Some of those organizations that sit here and say they will recover your drive for you probably can do so, but you've got to pay $5,000, maybe $7,500 for them to make the attempt, and that does not guarantee that it's going to work. So it's absolutely a viable option. We recommend it in some cases if you're hit with ransomware or if you have some sort of disaster that has damaged the drive itself. Just a point here for Ray to protect against that, but that's just me. But there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to recover from that. All right, the DR plan. We do recommend that you have an on-site and an off-site policy here. And the reason for that is simple. If you've got an on-site device, then if you need to recover a single file, somebody's deleted an email by accident, somebody has deleted a file that everybody uses, that kind of event, you can restore that very easily from an on-site device, okay? But as you can imagine, an on-site backup is just as vulnerable to the physical flood, the tornado, the lightning. And in many cases, depending on how you segment your network, it may also be vulnerable to the ransomware and the phishing attacks. So it is important to have something on site, but it is also important to take that and have a second and possibly even a third location where you're storing that off-site. All right, we can talk a bit about what do you do as far as why you might need a third and why that's smart, and where archiving comes in. But it is important to have that on-site and that off-site backup. To think a little further about that, where do you keep it? If you're doing work in the cloud today, whether it is with Microsoft, whether it's with Google, whether it's Amazon, you probably have an option, and hopefully you're already doing this with a copy of your backup. There are lots of those. There are even some smaller ones that are out there that are very, very good that you can look at. Some specialize in archiving data that you may look at once a year, as opposed to very fast data where you want to work in a DR setting and virtualize to keep you going. But that's a good question to ask, and we can certainly help you talk about where you want to put it and what the reasons are for doing that. And then you want to look at what your recovery policy is. Okay, how are you going to restore it? Are you testing it? We've talked about how critical that is. I would again suggest a quarterly test, certainly no less often than twice a year. But think about that. We've not only got to store your data, but you've got to be able to rehydrate that data, pull it back up, and work from it. And a lot of that goes back to the time constraints. And the next conversation we're going to have here in a moment is about those time and what is critical to your organization, what can you work with, and what is a fit for you. So there are two terms, RTO and RPO, that you may already be very familiar with them. If so, then that's great. If not, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about them. And one of them is looking at the past, looking in the rearview mirror, and one of them is looking forward. It's that radars, where do you want to go? It's this simple. Recovery time objective is the future, right? How quickly do you need to back up and running? And I know we're all going to say now, I need to be up, in the next 10 minutes, right? But if we realistically look at that, how long can you afford to be down before you begin to lose revenue, or you begin to lose data that you're not going to be able to recover and put back into the system? And this is probably unique to your organization. And the answer may be, I need to be up within hours. The answer may be, I can go a full day before I'm going to begin missing out on anything because I've got paper copies of transactions that took place today. The answer may be, I can send people home, call it vacation, let's get 3 days, get back up and running, see you Monday. There's no right or wrong answer, but it is completely dependent on how much future time you can go before you have to be back and running, and that is your recovery time objective. The second piece here, and this is the rearview mirror component, is what is your recovery point objective? And it's simply looking in the past and seeing how far back can I restore? Okay, and I'll tell you specifically, that is saying I need, I did a backup yesterday, so all I'm going to lose is things that took place after 10 a.m. yesterday morning. As long as I can get it installed, I'm good going forward. All right. Or it may be I need to do a backup every 2 hours because I work in the medical field, and if I lose track of medications, times I've visited patients, schedules, then I'm putting people's health in danger. Right. So those kinds of things are going to vary too. You might be able to go a whole day to last night's backup, or I might not be able to go past a couple of hours before harm begins to be done to my patients, clients, and my business, right? So it's how much time can you afford to lose? I will make a comment here that it is important to store more than just the single backup. Lots of folks will do, one per day and maybe incrementals during the day. But then the question is, how long do you keep that? And that's critical because a lot of the more advanced phishing and ransomware attacks today will drop something into your environment and it may sit there resident for a period of time. So if they say, I'm going to go a week or a month before I launch this exploit, and you restore from yesterday, you're actually restoring the problem that you're trying to avoid. So just keep in mind, it's important to have a strategy that goes back weeks, months, and maybe a year. And if you're in an industry where you need to have, for compliance reasons, longer than that, that's when you want to look at some of that cold storage to archive that data off. So this is sort of following along with that. What is your policy? What does your backup archive look like? How long do you need to hold on to that backup? Some professions governed by compliance, I think, HIPAA in particular in medical, maybe some policies in the legal field, depending on what kind of law you practice, may require you to keep copies of patient files or depositions or case files, those kinds of things for multiple years. Okay, so do those compliant needs affect your retention and your backup strategy? All right, the other piece here for your archive, if you want to clean up and reduce that footprint, and speed up your backup, you can find those cold storage options and those archiving options. So you're still going to go and get that back potentially, but if you only need to look up a file once a year, or it's every 6 months that you need some information that a client asks for or a patient asks for, then that's when you move that off of your main backup, which saves space, saves money, and saves time in making your recovery time faster. And you put that in an archive that might not be able to be retrieved in minutes. It might be hours, it might even be the next day, depending on what your tolerance is. But it helps you to keep only the best and most pertinent and most often used data in your active live backup. So as we go through this, our recommendation would be that you have TCS or a company like us do an assessment for you. So it is an assessment of your network and its health, and part of that assessment that we then can roll into is a backup or a BDR assessment. And some of those components may also include a backup plan and writing that. We've got people on staff who can help you write a backup plan. And that's as simple as, what do our processes look like in the event that we have a disaster that occurs? Who do we call first? Do we call the insurance? Do we call the attorney? Do we call the IT folks? Do I unplug machines? Do I remove them from the network? Do I turn the server off? Your plan will be unique to you. And the answer probably is, we want to do all of those things, but what is your order of operations? What does your process look like? So I would say schedule an assessment, whether it's with TCS, whether it's with somebody else. We can work in conjunction with an attorney, with an insurance provider, and make sure not only that you've got a backup in place that fits your needs, but also be sure that you have procedures in place and documentation in place that tells you how you want to go through that process. So that is one of the first steps to take, whether you have something in place for a BDR strategy today, or whether you're looking to put one in place, or if you wanted to upgrade what you have. So that is the presentation itself. I hope you found that valuable. I've had a couple of questions come in to me directly, so I want to address those. But certainly if you have others, please feel free to use the Q&A portion at the top of the Zoom screen, and want to go ahead and answer these couple right now. So one of them does pertain to what we were discussing earlier about backups of your backups. And so what I think in my mind is, I keep the on-site backup as we discussed for short-term needs. I do want to move that to cloud, whether it is Azure or whether it is somewhere else as a secondary copy. But then we recommend a tertiary copy, and that is as simple as finding a third place with the idea that if you cannot access your secondary backup, or in more likelihood, it may have the same infection that your primary network and backup have because of when the malware was installed. You're going to have that third option, and maybe you do change those retention options. Maybe you don't move one there quite as often. Maybe you keep them a little longer in that cold storage so that you can retrieve something from 6 months ago if you need to guarantee a clean copy. So I would say that's probably a good guideline as far as making backups of your backups. The next question is going to be around backing up email in the cloud. So great example is Office or Microsoft 365, right? It does a good job. It's got some little bit of backup function and retention in there, but it is possible through them to extend that period. It is also possible through third parties. We work with an application called Dropsuite, which does a great job of retaining not only emails, but Teams conversations, some of the SharePoint data, and those types of other information that you might want to save, and then it can archive that for you for future. So depending on your business and how you work, that's going to be important as well, and have a backup of that Microsoft data. And I'm sure some of the other vendors have something similar. We can certainly go and take a look at ways to help with that. So I hope that helps. That looks like it's it for questions right now. I don't think we have anything that's new other than duplicates. So I want to thank you for your time joining us today. Again, I would ask that if you have questions around backup, around disaster recovery, please contact me or contact your favorite TCS employee, whether it's one of the CSMs or to somebody that you have coming out to your location already. Ask them the question about how do we move into a disaster recovery stance and policy, and how do we make sure that you can be as protected and as safe as you can be. Thank you very much. Until the next webinar, I will look forward to seeing you soon, and have a great day.